Imagine walking into a crowded marketplace. The air is thick, not with dust or heat, but with noise, not the kind that comes from vendors shouting prices or children laughing. This is a different kind of noise. It's the murmur of unthinking agreement, the hum of conversations that say nothing, repeated endlessly, like broken records spinning in the sun. Everywhere you turn, eyes follow the same invisible rhythm. Faces tilt in unison, heads nod without hesitation, and voices repeat words they did not write. They've learned not to question the melody, only to dance to it. You notice something strange. You are the only one moving against the tide. You try to speak, not to provoke, but to point out the obvious, and you feel it instantly. The shift. The silence that falls around you is not the absence of sound, but the presence of judgment. In a moment, you become an outsider, an anomaly. The eyes that once passed over you without thought now weigh you, measure you, and find you guilty of thinking for yourself. Here's the paradox. You live in an age that worships individuality, yet demands conformity more than any other era before it. We are told to be ourselves, but only in ways that don't disrupt the collective trance. We are encouraged to speak our truth, but only if it fits within the boundaries of what is socially palatable. We are promised freedom, and yet most people would rather surrender it than bear the loneliness of standing alone. Why? Why does the crowd, in all its grandeur and size, seem so terrified of the solitary voice? Why do intelligent people with the capacity for critical thought, melt into mediocrity when placed in groups? Why do we mistake the volume of an idea for its truth? Maybe you've noticed it in your own life, how conversations with friends, family, or colleagues can turn into scripted plays, each person delivering lines that have been rehearsed by the culture at large. No one asks where the script came from. No one dares to throw it away. You begin to wonder if the real epidemic is not ignorance, but obedience. Not a lack of information, but an excess of unexamined beliefs. We live surrounded by noise, social media noise, political noise, cultural noise, and in this noise, thinking becomes exhausting. So we outsource it. We let the loudest voice decide what is real, and then we mimic it. It's easier. It's safer. But here lies the great and terrible question. If the majority of the people around you have surrendered their minds to the collective will, if their thoughts are no longer their own, then who exactly are you trusting when you follow them? And if you choose not to follow, if you resist the current, are you ready to face the truth that the path of clarity is also the path of exile? The crowd will tell you that to leave is madness. But what if it's the other way around? What if the real madness is staying? You feel it now, the tension between belonging and being free. You know that choosing one will mean losing the other. And in that quiet, unsettling awareness, the marketplace hum becomes deafening. And so the question remains, will you keep dancing to a song you never chose, or will you learn to walk in silence? The most dangerous prison is the one you cannot see. Its bars are not made of steel, but of thoughts. Its walls are not brick, but shared illusions. And in the prison of the mind, escape is not prevented by guards, but by the prisoners themselves, who have grown to love their captivity. Carl Jung once wrote about the collective unconscious, a vast reservoir of archetypes, myths, and inherited patterns of thought that shape how we see the world. It's not just that we're influenced by our culture, it's that we're submerged in it, like fish in water, unable to recognize the medium we swim in. The mass mind doesn't need to silence you directly. It simply wraps you in the comfort of familiarity until you stop seeking anything else. Friedrich Nietzsche called it the herd instinct. He observed that most people do not truly seek truth. They seek comfort, security, and the reassurance of belonging. This instinct was once a survival mechanism. In ancient times, being cast out from the group often meant death. Your brain still carries that ancient terror, whispering that to stand apart is to risk annihilation. But in the modern world, that instinct is weaponized. The tools are no longer spears and exile. They are ridicule, cancellation, algorithmic conditioning, and the steady drip of ideas that are repeated until they feel like your own. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. But in an age of mass psychosis, many truths never survive the first stage. They are mocked into silence before they can find their voice. You see this every day. An unpopular opinion is voiced, perhaps on politics, morality, or meaning. Before the idea itself can even be examined, the speaker is attacked. Not their logic, not their evidence, them. And so, most people learn the unspoken rule. It is not worth thinking what cannot be said. This is the root of mass psychosis, not stupidity in the literal sense, but the deliberate suspension of one's own critical faculties to avoid the pain of social friction. It is an emotional defense mechanism masquerading as rational consensus. Aldous Huxley, in Brave New World, warned not of a dictatorship of fear, but of one of pleasure, where people are so sedated by entertainment, comfort, and distraction that they no longer care about truth. In such a world, ignorance is not imposed from above. It is chosen willingly. Psychologically, this is reinforced by groupthink, the phenomenon where individuals suppress dissenting views to maintain group harmony. Studies in social psychology, like Solomon Asch's conformity experiments, show that even when the truth is obvious, a single dissenting voice often collapses under the pressure of the majority's agreement. The human brain is not wired for truth at all costs. It is wired for survival. And survival once meant blending in. The problem is that in an age of global communication, the group is no longer a tribe of 100 people. It is millions. The pressure to conform is exponentially greater, and the speed at which falsehoods spread is unprecedented. You may think you are immune. But pause for a moment. How many of your beliefs did you actually arrive at through your own reasoning? And how many did you inherit without ever testing them? How much of what you think is self-evident is simply the residue of repeated exposure? The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of bad faith, the act of deceiving oneself to avoid the responsibility of freedom. It is easier to pretend you have no choice than to face the dizzying abyss of having one. Mass psychosis is bad faith on a civilizational scale, the collective pretending that reality is simpler than it is, because complexity demands courage. And so we live in an age where stupidity is not simply the absence of knowledge, but the rejection of thought itself. A world where the dangerous man is not the one who knows too little, but the one who dares to know too much. This is the hidden root. People do not want the truth. They want the illusion that their lives make sense. And if that illusion is shared by enough people, it becomes reality, no matter how absurd it may be. But here's the deeper tragedy. The more people surrender their minds to the collective, the more the collective itself becomes incapable of reason. And when the collective goes mad, the sane are painted as lunatics. You may think you're watching this from the outside, but the truth is, you are already inside. The real question is, will you recognize the bars before the door closes forever? Mass psychosis does not announce itself with banners or sirens. It seeps in quietly, like a slow leak in the hull of a ship, and by the time you feel the cold rush of water against your ankles, it is already too late. At first, the consequences are subtle. You notice conversations becoming shallower, not in words, but in weight. People stop asking why and settle for what. The news becomes a theater of outrage, every headline designed not to inform, but to provoke. The more polarized the narrative, the easier it is to choose a side, and the less effort it takes to think. Your relationships begin to change, not because you have drifted apart, but because there is less and less room for independent thought. You find yourself biting your tongue, not out of politeness, but out of self-preservation. You avoid topics. You let lies pass unchallenged. You smile when you want to scream. This is how the mind learns to kneel. On a societal scale, the consequences become catastrophic. When enough people abdicate their responsibility to think, the culture itself becomes an echo chamber. Policies are made not based on wisdom, but on popularity. Complex issues are reduced to slogans. And the people intelligent enough on their own become collectively stupid when acting as a crowd. History is full of such moments. Witch hunts in medieval Europe, where entire communities convinced themselves that human evil could be burned away in the screams of the accused. The rise of fascist regimes, where neighbors turned on neighbors, not because they hated them, but because they feared being the lone dissenter. Financial bubbles, where rational investors ignored obvious danger because everyone else was still buying. It is the same pattern. The crowd convinces itself it is sane, and in doing so, becomes blind to its own madness. Psychology offers an explanation in the form of pluralistic ignorance, the phenomenon where individuals privately reject a belief, but assume everyone else accepts it, so they go along with it. Imagine a theater where smoke starts to fill the room. Each person sees it, feels unease, but looks around and sees no one reacting, so they too remain seated. The smoke thickens, the air grows toxic, and still no one moves. This is not just a metaphor. This is the air we breathe today. Cognitive biases tighten the trap. Confirmation bias ensures we seek only the information that supports our pre-existing views. Authority bias makes us trust a statement simply because someone with status said it. Bandwagon effect tricks us into thinking the majority must be right. These biases are not flaws of intelligence. They are features of a brain designed for survival in a tribe. But in the wrong environment, they become fatal weaknesses. On an individual level, the unseen consequences are even more insidious. When you suppress your own critical thinking for too long, you start to lose it. The neural pathways of skepticism weaken. Your threshold for questioning drops. Eventually, you no longer can think against the grain, not because someone forbids it, but because the muscle has atrophied. And when the mind weakens, the soul follows. You stop trusting your instincts. You stop feeling the sharp sting of injustice. You stop caring whether what you believe is true, only whether it is safe. This is how civilizations rot from the inside. Not through invasion, but through corrosion. Not because the people are too ignorant, but because they are too comfortable. And perhaps the most devastating consequence of all is this. Once a culture reaches a certain level of collective delusion, it will attack any attempt to wake it up. Try telling a sleepwalker that they're asleep, and they'll get angry. Try telling a crowd in the throes of mass psychosis that they are wrong, and they will see you as the threat. This is why genuine change is so rare. It is not enough to have the truth. You must be willing to endure exile for it. But here lies the dangerous reality. If you choose to remain silent, you become complicit in the madness. If you speak, you may be cast out. And so, the real question emerges. Are you willing to be the lone voice of reason in a room that has forgotten reason exists? Because if you are not, the room will decide for you. And when it does, you may not even notice that the walls have closed in until there is no way out. Rebellion does not begin with a banner in the street. It begins in the silent chambers of the mind, with one dangerous sentence. What if they're all wrong? That is the spark. Small, inconvenient, often terrifying. Because the moment you entertain it, you feel the ground beneath your feet shift. Suddenly, the comfort of the crowd turns cold. You realize that the safety you felt was not safety at all, but sedation. Breaking free from mass psychosis is not a matter of shouting louder than the crowd. The crowd thrives on volume. It feeds on attention. The true act of rebellion is not to match its noise, but to withdraw from its frequency altogether. First, you must reclaim your attention. In an age where algorithms dictate your reality, your attention is the front line of your freedom. Every headline, every viral post, every trending outrage is bait designed to keep you reactive, not reflective. You must starve the machine of your mind's energy. Limit your exposure to the echo chambers. Step away from the drip feed of consensus. Learn to be comfortable with not knowing the latest outrage of the hour. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The first step out of mass psychosis is to drag the unconscious into the light, to question the stories, the slogans, and the unquestioned truths you've inherited. Write them down. Trace their origins. Ask yourself, who benefits if I believe this? Who loses if I stop? Second, you must reclaim your language. George Orwell warned that corrupted language leads to corrupted thought. When the crowd repeats slogans, they are not merely speaking, they are programming themselves. Refuse to use the words designed to limit your thinking. Speak in precise terms, even if it makes you slower to respond. The crowd hates slowness. It lives on reflex. You must relearn deliberation. Third, you must find the others. Rebellion in solitude is noble, but rebellion in community is sustainable. This does not mean forming another echo chamber. It means surrounding yourself with people who value truth more than comfort, who challenge you as much as they support you. people whose loyalty is not to you personally, but to the reality you are all trying to uncover. But here's the paradox. To find such people, you must first be willing to stand alone. You must endure the wilderness, the period where you feel exiled from the normal world. Nietzsche's Übermensch is born in this wilderness, forged in the loneliness of self-reliance. Only when you no longer fear exile can you see who else has been exiled for the same reason. Fourth, you must reclaim your silence. The crowd is addicted to noise because silence is where thinking begins. Most people cannot stand to be alone with their own thoughts for more than a few minutes without reaching for a distraction. But silence is not emptiness. It is the forge where clarity is shaped. Practice being still. Walk without music. Sit without a screen. Let your mind wander into places the crowd has never shown you. Finally, you must reclaim your courage. Every act of rebellion, no matter how small, requires the willingness to be disliked. This is the price. There is no way around it. The crowd will test you. It will call you arrogant, paranoid, foolish, or cruel. It will use guilt to pull you back, reminding you of the warmth you left behind. But that warmth was the heat of the herd, not the fire of your own mind. The irony is that the moment you break free, the world does not suddenly become clearer. In fact, it becomes messier. The easy answers dissolve. The moral lines blur. You are left with complexity, uncertainty, and the constant demand to think for yourself. Many cannot bear it and return to the comfort of the crowd. But if you can stay, if you can resist the urge to return, something shifts. You begin to see the patterns the crowd cannot see. You start to understand the mechanisms of manipulation, the psychology of obedience, the architecture of mass delusion. You see the strings being pulled, and more importantly, you see who is pulling them. And once you see, you cannot unsee. This is the beginning of true sovereignty, not the kind handed to you by governments or social movements, but the kind that exists entirely within your mind, the kind no one can take unless you give it willingly. Your rebellion will not change the crowd overnight. Most will never leave. But your very existence outside the mass psychosis is a threat to it. Every free mind is a crack in the wall, a reminder that escape is possible. And so you must ask yourself, will you be another voice lost in the roar? Or will you be the quiet, steady pulse that reminds others there is life beyond the trance? Because the first rebel was never the one who shouted the loudest. It was the one who refused to bow. There comes a moment, after the noise has faded and the dust has settled, when you realize the most disorienting truth of all. The crowd was never your greatest enemy. It was only a mirror, reflecting the parts of you that wanted to belong more than you wanted to be free. For all the talk of manipulation, propaganda, and mass psychosis, the final realization is far more intimate. The chains were not forged entirely by society. They were also forged by your own hands, link by link, every time you chose comfort over clarity, safety over truth. This is where the real liberation happens, because this is where the illusion of them versus you dies. You see that the crowd's madness is a projection of the madness you once carried within yourself. You see that the lies you fought so hard against were the same lies you once repeated without question. And you begin to understand. Escaping the mass psychosis is not about defeating others. It is about transforming yourself. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the process of integrating the shadow, of becoming whole by embracing both light and darkness within. Until you confront the parts of yourself that craved the warmth of conformity, you will always be at risk of returning to it. The crowd will find its way back into your heart unless you have faced the reason you once loved it. This is the paradox of awakening. The more you awaken, the more compassion you feel for those still asleep. You no longer look at them as fools, but as mirrors of your former self. You remember the fear, the longing, the relief that came from surrendering responsibility to someone else, and you realize that, in their eyes, you are the madman now. The greatest danger after awakening is bitterness. It is easy to hate the crowd for its blindness, to resent it for rejecting you. But bitterness is just another prison, one that keeps you chained to the very thing you escaped. True liberation is not measured by how far you've run from the herd, but by how little power its noise still has over your mind. And here lies the deepest truth. The opposite of mass psychosis is not isolation. It is sovereignty, the ability to think, feel, and act from a place untouched by manipulation, whether you stand alone or among millions. You realize that your role is not to save everyone. You cannot drag someone out of a dream they are determined to keep. Your role is to remain awake yourself, to live in such a way that your clarity becomes a quiet, unshakable beacon for those who are ready to see. This is where the fear begins to fade. You stop looking over your shoulder for the crowd's approval. You stop needing your thoughts to be validated by numbers. You stop shaping yourself to fit a world that no longer fits you. And in that space, in that silence, something unexpected happens. You begin to hear your own voice again. Not the voice of rebellion, not the voice of reaction, but the voice that was there before the noise, the voice that is not for or against the crowd, but simply yours. It speaks in truths that do not depend on consensus. It whispers insights that will never trend on social media. It tells you that your worth was never measured by agreement, and that your freedom was never given. It was always yours to claim. You begin to live differently. You read not to confirm, but to discover. You speak not to win, but to illuminate. You listen not to react, but to understand. And slowly, the world changes, not because you have changed it directly, but because you have removed yourself from its madness without abandoning your humanity. The final, most powerful realization is this: you cannot control the collective mind, but you can choose not to be part of it. Mass psychosis will come and go. The faces will change. The slogans will change. The technology will change. But the human tendency to surrender thought for belonging will remain. Your task is not to eradicate this tendency from the world, but to uproot it from yourself every single day. And when you do, you discover that freedom is not the absence of influence, it is the mastery of it. You will still live among others, still hear their voices, still feel the pull of their tides. But you will stand rooted in the one place they cannot touch, the quiet clarity of your own mind. This is the truth the crowd will never tell you, because it cannot. The crowd only exists when you believe you need it. The moment you don't, it dissolves into the background of your life, and you walk forward without its permission. And so you leave the marketplace. The hum of unthinking agreement fades behind you. The road ahead is quieter, lonelier, and far less certain. But it is yours, and in the stillness, you finally understand. You were never meant to be one of them. You were meant to be free.